Hey everyone, my name is Lance, and this is Amped About Aimpad. For today's episode, I wanted to focus on a couple of things that I haven't done before in detail, and that is to focus on some professional use case scenarios to use with analog keys. So this might be something interesting to you if you are in some type of profession that requires fine control over the programs and applications that you use on a daily basis, and this might get the wheels thinking on, wow, these analog keys could actually help me in these certain types of situations. So let's go ahead and jump right into it.
Alright, so here we have Excel, something that if you're in any sort of profession, you're probably fairly familiar with it. And so one use case that I thought of was in regards to using the scroll wheel to kind of navigate around. So if you're in Excel and you're kind of editing and things like that, usually what will happen is maybe there's a field further down that you want to get to. So right now I'm at maybe field 20 and I want to go to field 200. So what I have to do to get to 200 is I have to scroll, and then find it, and then okay, there it is. Another way you could navigate through it is you would go over to the mouse and kind of click this and drag it up and get to that field quickly as well. So that's one possible way that you might be using Excel currently. Something else that could be useful for you in some use case scenarios would be having that scroll functionality on your keyboard instead. So rather than having to leave your data entry as you're putting in things into the number pad and adding data and doing your data manipulation, what you could do is you could assign a function to the analog keys. So based off of how far down you press it is how fast it will scroll. So you'll see it's kind of scrolling there, but if I push it down further, it's going to go faster, and then further, it's going to go faster. So I can scroll actually much faster than using the scroll wheel. So I can get to 200 in that amount of time versus 200 when I'm scrolling by the wheel in that amount of time. So it's a significant amount of time if you just want to quickly go back and forth without having to pick up your hand off of the numpad as you're entering in data and manipulating and things like that. You can actually just swap functions or different profiles and things like that and have both functions active at the same time. So that I think is a pretty useful use case that you can have, and this is obviously just Excel, but if you're even just browsing things on Reddit or whatever, it's nice and easy movement. You don't actually have to like scroll constantly to get to pages. So I think that's one use case. All right, so here's another use case. This program is called Blender for those that are unfamiliar with it. It's basically a 3D modeling program. It's fairly popular, so you may have heard of it. But one thing that I have known when I've used Blender in the past is that sometimes it can be a little finicky when you're trying to manipulate an object exactly the way you want. So typically what you do when you're using the mouse, again, you would do a right click, and that will allow you to drag the object in two different planes, right? So left and right, up and down, and that's pretty good. Then if you want to like rotate the object, you'll middle click and then rotate, and you can go back and forth and look at it from different angles and things like that. But the problem that I've ran into is sometimes what you want to do is you want to take two different segments of an object, maybe like a cube and a sphere or something, and you want to like smash them together. And sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to line those up. If you've placed them properly and things like that, it maybe not be that big of a deal, but sometimes you want to offset them just slightly or things like that in a specific plane. And when you're trying to rotate an object using the middle click, it's difficult to keep your plane like precisely straight. So if I line it up right there, you can see that gray line right in the middle, and I try to go precisely across the way, it kind of goes off a little bit as I'm moving it around. I'm trying to keep it straight, so it's pretty good, but you can see it's not like exact. And so because the mouse is controlling these two planes going up and down and left and right, it can be difficult to finally do that unless you do some type of software manipulation on the mouse to do angle snapping and things like that. And I hate angle snapping, but more or less what you can do with analog keys is what I can do is, since I'm precisely being able to control specific directions using the WASD keys, I can hold this key down and then rotate exactly on that plane, right? I can go super fast if I want to and not be messed up, and super slow if I want to, and it's nice and smooth control over that specific object that I'm manipulating, and I can manipulate it in either plane going up and down and left and right, and it won't deviate from any of those things because I can isolate the controls of the mouse control based off of how far down I'm pressing each of those keys. So I think you might find some use case scenarios where it would be useful to manipulate 3D objects, whether you're going to be zooming in or zooming out or doing just normal mouse manipulation. There's lots of functionalities you can do on a device that has analog keys. All right, so here's a use case scenario that I'm pretty confident you have not thought of. This is a radiology program that is designed to display CT images. So we actually have a radiologist that uses an Aimpad R5 keyboard on a daily basis, and he uses it while he's reading studies. So to give you kind of an idea of what's kind of going on here, so as I use the scroll wheel, you can see I'll move up and down here, and these lines on these other images will be moving up and down. So basically the whole point of this is to be able to look at a patient's insides from different angles and different perspectives to get an idea of what type of abnormalities or issues they might be having. So what a radiologist does while he's reading is he does this action pretty much all day long. He takes the mouse wheel and he scrolls up and he scrolls down and he scrolls up and he scrolls down. Does that thousands and thousands of times every single day. And he's just scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And this action is very taxing on their finger. Like, it will get sore and tired and they'll have to take a break and all that type of stuff because it's a constant action going up and down as you're trying to manipulate these objects or these images and look at something that's abnormal. So what the radiologist does that uses the Aimpad R5 keyboard is that he has the scroll wheel functions mapped to his keyboard. And so what he'll do is he has them mapped to A and D, but I have them mapped to Q and A. But you can scroll up and down nice and smoothly based off of how far down you press the key. So if you want to go up into the head area and just kind of scroll up around in that head, and then you go all the way back down towards the middle of the body and kind of scroll up and down. And so you can manipulate it just by image if you really want to, and not have the same taxing system. So he just uses it like this, and he just kind of goes left and right to manipulate those. And it saves his finger fatigue, and it's much more comfortable. He doesn't have to like constantly scroll and scroll. Some other things that might be interesting to you is there's these two numbers here, W and L, for window and level, and they're basically brightness and contrast. And so what a radiologist will do is, right now this is the lung area of the patient's images, and you can't see it very well because it's all dark. So what you would do is you'd left click and hold and then kind of drag it around, and now you can kind of visualize those lungs a little bit better and things like that. So when you're doing that, you're manipulating both those numbers at the same time, and kind of similar to the blender example, it's difficult to just do it in one specific plane left and right because your mouse is kind of tend to go up and down a little bit and not manipulate just specifically those numbers. But if you use the Aimpad keyboard, you can go precisely left and right and precisely adjust those numbers. So I'm adjusting the W number right now and the L number right now when I go up and down. So it's a different control mechanism. Since I'm isolating those analog keys precisely, it's much more easier to do that. Another quick idea here is that this is just a 3D model of the images that are kind of visualized here, and if I wanted to like rotate left and right a little bit here, this program in particular is really twitchy. So if I get off just a little bit, it starts to rotate really badly, and it's difficult to get it back to the way I want, at the angle I want. It's really kind of actually a really frustrating thing. And I think it's partly the way it's designed, but more or less the use case here is that the same type of thing, I can isolate the control so it's always precisely going left and right around that one specific angle, and it's not going to get offset at all because the mouse is not going to be able to go up and down since I'm isolating those controls precisely. All right, and lastly we have Ableton Live. So Ableton Live is a music production program that allows you to take music samples and mix them in slightly different ways or interesting ways, and it can be used either just purely for production but also for live demonstration of music. And what it relies heavily on in order to allow subtle control is something called MIDI. So those that are unfamiliar with what MIDI is, it's a technology from the 80s that was designed for digital musical instruments to allow them to communicate and connect with one another and provide variable amounts of digital information so that the sound can be interesting. So essentially it provides a signal from 0 to 127 along that spectrum. So for example, if you had a MIDI piano, based off of how hard you hit it is what that value would come out as the loudness of that key. So I've been spending some time a lot on trying to figure out how to get to do this, and I've had several people request, can you make the Aimpad keyboard a MIDI controller? And the answer is yes. We're doing it through, in this example, through a program from a company called Ocean Swift. So I'll put a link in the description below on how to get to the program. They actually had a new release that just came out this week, and it's pretty fantastic, so I highly recommend checking it out. But basically what it does is it takes the signals out of the Aimpad keyboard and converts it into a MIDI signal. And then what you can do is in Ableton Live, you can click this MIDI button, and anything that's lit up in purple is something that you can control with MIDI, whether you want to enable something and turn it on or off, or allow a variable setting of something like frequency or decay or whatever, right? So there's tons and tons of configurability, and these are the controls that I've set up particularly for this demonstration. And so there's a value that corresponds to a CC or a control aspect, and then a certain number that is for that value. So I don't want to get too deep into the woods here, but that's more or less what's going on. So I'm going to turn this off here and then show you visually what's happening. So I have this section is an XY pad, so you can modulate the sound based off of how far down you move the Aimpad keys in each of these different directions. I've set it up so that if I press the space bar, it turns this Tokyo kind of overlay on, and then the shift key does this electrical distortion sound. And then lastly, this other distortion I've applied to the analog E key. So as I push it down a little bit, you'll see that it applies the dry wet, meaning more or less how much of the distortion is being applied to it. So all the way from 100 all the way down to 0. So I can slightly adjust that. And that's really, really important to come across for musical instruments. You need some type of this variability, because then you can put some type of emotion or feeling into the music that you're producing. It's not very stale and stagnant of, I just hit a key and it's always constantly the same sound. You want, based off of how you hit that key, a different type of sound is going to be produced. So what I'd like to do is just do this quick demo here, and I've set up a single track. That's all of this is just a single track that has this techno beat, and if you don't like techno music, I'm sorry, but I think this one comes across pretty well by using it. So all I'm going to do is just basically play through this small sample of this techno beat, and then use the Aimpad analog keys to either turn something on or turn it off, or add some subtle feel or sound effects to this this single track. And you can go hog wild with this, having tons and tons of different tracks, but this is just to give you an idea of what's possible on a single track, and use your imagination on what could possibly happen if you wanted to do something with this type of analog keys. And there you go. No Aimpad video would be complete without some type of gameplay, so I decided to show you Just Cause 3. Now Just Cause 3 has a fantastic analog movement. You can move in any direction and speed that you would like to while on foot. It also has tons and tons of vehicles that you would use, but you also have a parachute and a wingsuit you can deploy at any time, so the vehicles are pretty pointless. But the wingsuit is a little bit of interesting things compared to keyboard and Aimpad mode. So let me show you what it looks like with the Aimpad mode first. So I have smooth control over how I move the trajectory of this wingsuit based off of how far down I press all the keys. And I can track an object and do whatever I want to. So there's a machine gun mounted here, so obviously I can blast through anything that I would want to. Now if I switch to keyboard mode, I just barely will tap the keys and you kind of fly all over the place. So it's hard to line up a shot on something unless you are kind of like tap, 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 tap to get something. And that's not a good gameplay experience. It's kind of annoying. But I would highly recommend playing this game using analog movement, simply because you can line up your shots exactly the way you want and move exactly how you want. And that's the way gaming should be.
Alright, so there you go, several professional use case scenarios that will hopefully get you thinking about different ways that you might use analog keys in the future. Also a small playthrough with Just Cause 3, and hopefully you enjoyed that as well. If you like this video and like to see more, go ahead and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching.